In the first week of September 1939, a Polish light tank called the 7TP rolled into the path of Germany's Panzer I-1, carried a high-velocity 37 gun. The other, two rifle-caliber machine guns. When they finally met in battle, the difference wasn't theoretical anymore. German crews pulled their triggers and watched their bullets spark and die on Polish armor. What you're about to hear is the story of that meeting, how a modest Polish tank, born from careful engineering and hard lessons of the 1930s, proved its worth against Germany's earliest panzers, and why that mattered in the desperate first days of the war. The 7TP did not begin as a headline maker. It grew out of a British idea, the Vickers 6-ton light tank that Poland licensed and then patiently reworked into something tougher and smarter. The Polish engineers kept the basic layout, but they rebuilt it to fit their needs. A reliable diesel engine that burned less readily than gasoline if hit, improved armor up to around 17 millimeters on the hull front, a modernized single two-man turret for most combat tanks, and crucially, a high-velocity 37 Bofors gun with a coaxial 7.92 machine gun. It was still a light tank, about 9.5 tons, quick on roads, but its value lived in what it could see and what it could hit. That seeing came through a new rotating commander's periscope conceived by a Polish officer-engineer, Rudolf Gundlach. With it, the commander could scan all around the horizon without climbing out or rotating his whole body. A simple leap that made the little turret feel much bigger and far more aware. The hitting came from that 37 Bofors, a weapon that, on the eve of the war, could punch through the armor of any German tank then in service at practical battle ranges, provided the angle and range were right. These were not miracles, they were careful choices, made in time to matter. Across the border, Germany rushed into war with a mixed armored force that was large but not yet mature. Most of its tanks in 1939 were light. The Panzer I and Panzer II made up the bulk, while Panzer III and IV were still comparatively few. The Panzer I, the training tank that had become a frontline machine out of necessity, wore thin armor, around 7 to 13 millimeters, and in its tiny turret sat two 7.92 machine guns. Those guns were fine for suppressing infantry and soft targets. They were never meant to break armor. Against a proper tank, especially one like the 7TP with face-hardened plates and a gunner ready to answer back, the Panzer I was almost defenseless. Its crews might try to close to point-blank range, hunt for vision slits, tracks, or rear plates. But in a clean, head-on meeting, they didn't have the tool for the job. Poland had only a few hundred, proper, tanks of all types in 1939, and only a fraction of those were the refined, gun-armed 7TPs. But they organized what they had carefully. Two light tank battalions fielded the 7TP single-turret gun tanks. Others, still equipped with earlier twin-turret 7TP, armed only with machine guns, served mostly in secondary roles or were folded into the defense of Warsaw. Not every 7TP had a radio. Commanders' vehicles were favored for sets, while most line tanks followed by eyesight and flags. It wasn't ideal, but when the battalion commanders did have working radios, their tanks could coordinate in ways that surprised German units accustomed to facing scattered resistance rather than sharp, timed counterstrokes from mobile Polish armor. On 4 September, just 3 days into the invasion, the 2nd Light Tank Battalion took position in the southern approaches to Piotrkow Tribunalski, near the village of Wola Krzysztoporska. German armored spearheads from the 1st Panzer Division were already pressing forward. The Poles counterattacked. Two 7TP companies rolled out across fields and lanes, using hedgerows and low rises for cover. In the opening exchanges, they knocked out armored cars and several tanks, 6 by one reliable account that traces back through Polish research, while losing only one of their own 7TPs. It was a small, clear test, a gun-armed Polish light tank meeting Germany's earliest panzers. The Bofors gun did what it was designed to do. The 7TPs fired, often from hull down if they could find it, and watched German light tanks and cars go still. On the German side, Panzer I crews swung their machine guns onto the 7TP, and saw the tracers spark against armor and skid away. An awful feeling for anyone inside a tank. The next day, 5 September, the Polish battalion tried to do even more. All three companies joined an attack against elements of the 4th Panzer Division preparing to push on Piotrkow. The 7 TPs burst onto the road network at Wola Krzysztoporska and cut into a German motorized column from the 12th Infantry Regiment attached to that Panzer Division. In the fighting that followed, the Poles destroyed a mix of vehicles, armored cars, trucks, and tanks, on the order of 15, before the weight of German numbers and artillery fire broke up the counterattack. It was one of the largest armor clashes of the campaign to that point. The cost to the 7 TP battalion was real. Several tanks lost, more disabled and unrecoverable under fire. But the message within those wrecks was unmistakable. When a 7 TP saw a Panzer I, the Polish gun could end the fight. When a Panzer I saw a 7 TP, its machine guns could not. German units escalated quickly, calling in 20 armed Panzer IIs, 3.7 cm anti-tank guns, and increasingly the Luftwaffe to pry the Polish armor out of the way. None of this meant the 7 TP was some invulnerable wonder. It was a light tank. Its armor, while resistant to rifle-caliber rounds and splinters, was not built to shrug off heavy hits. A well-placed 20 burst, a 3.7 cm parquet round, or a Stuka's bomb could tear it apart. Its small numbers meant losses hurt. And when the Luftwaffe found a battalion on the move or caught it forming up for a counterattack, the thin top armor suffered brutally. Yet judged by the assignments Warsaw gave it, mobile counterattacks, local spoiling thrusts, and quick, sharp defense, the 7 TP was exactly the right tool. Its 37 gun had good muzzle velocity and practical penetration, and Polish crews were trained to use it at the under 1,000-meter ranges that the campaign's terrain often imposed. It helps here to understand just what that 37 Bofors could do. Depending on ammunition and the angle of impact, contemporary Polish and Swedish data put its penetration in the range that could crack 30-40 millimeters of armor at a few hundred meters, and more at ideal angles. In 1939, that meant any German tank then in service was vulnerable under the right conditions, including early Panzer IVs whose armor had not yet thickened to the later war standard. The Bofors was no giant. It was a precise, hard-hitting little spear, and in a neat two-man turret the Polish gunner could bring it on target and fire briskly. The 7 TP's problem wasn't lethality, it was surviving long enough to fire again. By contrast, the Panzer I's stubbier, rifle-caliber machine guns were what they were, infantry weapons in a turret, meant to sweep trenches and trucks, not dual tanks. They could kill a tank crew if a burst slipped into an open hatch, or if a stream of tracers chewed through a vision slit at murderously close range. They could beat up tankettes or punch holes in soft skin. But armor? No. Germany's own experience in Spain had already hinted at the problem, where Panzer I machine guns struggled against the Soviet T-26. In Poland, where the 7 TP brought better armor than a tankette and a real anti-armor gun, that lesson was hammered home. To cope, German columns learned to keep anti-tank guns forward, call Stukas faster, and lean on Panzer II platoons, so that a 20 mortar cannon would be nearby to help deal with stubborn armor. The shape of the early fighting explains how both truths could be real at once. Polish tankers could win local duels and still lose the campaign. The German XVI Panzer Corps driving on Piotrkow was huge, 2 panzer divisions plus supporting infantry, and the Wehrmacht's overall armored inventory at the start of September ran into the thousands, dominated by Panzer I and II. Against that, Poland could field only a few hundred tanks and tankettes of all kinds, with its 7 TP concentrated in 2 battalions and a handful of smaller companies. The math left little room for bad luck. Even when a counterattack shattered the head of a German column, there were usually more columns behind it, and the air above was hostile. To understand what it felt like inside a 7 TP in those days, picture the crew at their stations. The driver low in the hull, squinting through a narrow slot. The gunner on the left in the turret, hand on the traverse and elevation wheels. the commander on the right managing the bustle of observation, loading, and direction. In a commander's tank, the short whip aerial and a taller mast, if the crew had time to raise it, reached for a signal. When the order came, the driver nudged forward, the gunner got range and angle, and the commander called the shot. The gun's crack was sharp and immediate, the recoil a quick punch. If the target was a Panzer I at a few hundred meters, the armor-piercing round bit and broke through with frightening ease. The Germans, for their part, would return a flurry of machine gun fire that pecked harmlessly at the 7 T-piece faceplates, a sensory storm more than a lethal one, unless a burst found the wrong seam at the wrong moment. Then came the real danger. The German follow-on, the gun with a bigger bite, the aircraft that didn't miss. The Polish crews learned to move with caution and fury at once, fighting in short, violent bursts, and then slipping away before German artillery or bombers could range them. They tilted their tanks into ditches to expose only the turret, fired from behind barns and orchards, used the two-man turret to keep the gun working while the commander watched flanks through the periscope. Radios made a difference when they worked, allowing a platoon to change direction, catch a German recon element, and hit first. But there were never enough sets for every tank, and flags still mattered in 1939. The 1st Light Tank Battalion, equipped with 7 TP, bought time for withdrawing infantry around the Vistula and later fought near Gloxo before breaking east. The 2nd Battalion, after Piotrkow, retreated through central Poland, shielding mobilization at Brzesk and then fighting around Wlodawa, where German air attacks cost it heavily. In Warsaw, spare and training 7 TPs, some the older twin-turret variant armed only with machine guns, were thrown into the city's defense, dueling German infantry and supporting local counterattacks in the suburbs like Wola and around Oaksey Airfield. They were used boldly, and they were used up. When fuel or oil ran out and escape was impossible, Polish crews spiked their own tanks rather than let them be taken whole. And still, the 7 TPs kept showing the same pattern in battle. When they met Panzer I tanks without immediate heavy support, the Polish gun won. That reality didn't stop Germany's advance, but it bent German tactics. Panzer units learned to mass their 20 guns and Parquet 36s at vulnerable points, while Luftwaffe squadrons were trained to answer armored trouble quickly. In the short run, that made German columns more cautious around tree lines and village edges. In the long run, it pushed German industry to arm new vehicles with bigger guns and to turn older Panzer I chassis into something more useful. First as carriers for heavy infantry guns, then as the earliest German tank destroyers carrying captured 4.7 cm Czech guns. Those conversions began to appear soon after the Polish campaign in 1940, and they tell their own quiet truth about lessons learned. The largest tank battle of the campaign arrived later, near Tomaszow Lubelski in the second half of September. By then, the Polish armored force was battered but still fighting, with 7 TP mixed into the formations that tried to break south and then east. There, in a brutal series of clashes, Polish tankers in 7 TP and other vehicles fought against 2 Panzer divisions among other German formations. The Germans won the field, and what remained of Army Krakow and other Polish units fell back and in many cases surrendered. But even in that defeat, the pattern held where it could. A 7 TP could kill what it saw. It just couldn't see and shoot forever under the weight of artillery, air power, and numbers. Looking at the machine side by side makes the reasons plain. The 7 TP's diesel engine was a simple, stubborn heart that did not ignite as readily as gasoline under fire. Its armor was modest, but face hardened where it counted. Its gun was one of the best 37 pieces of the late 1930s, and in Polish service, it fired reliable armor-piercing shot that, at normal fighting ranges, did what was asked of it. The turret layout gave the gunner control and the commander awareness, especially with gun latches rotating periscope, which prefigured the all-round vision that would later become standard across the Allied world. These were clear, thoughtful advantages. Set against them were the hard limits of light armor, too few radios, and too few tanks to absorb losses. Against a Panzer division, a single battalion could shine for a day and then be gone. There is a moment that captures all of this, told in the scarred metal left on fields outside Piotrkow and in memory. The ringing sound of rifle caliber hits on armor, the Polish gunner's shot got it. As the sight picture settled, the commander keeping watch for the second threat, the gun that could really hurt them. The Panzer I crews, brave men trapped by design, must have felt the same tightness in the chest. Fire again, try the turret ring, try the vision slit, reverse, reverse. Then the flash and the hammer blow that turned their small tank into a coffin. This was not chivalry. It was engineering laid bare under fire. If the story ended there, in a handful of early duels, it would be a small, grim victory writ in steel. But it doesn't, because even as Poland's armored battalions were bled away, one Polish invention from the 7 TP quietly outlived the tank itself and traveled farther than any crew could imagine. Gundlach's periscope, the simple, elegant 360-degree eye that let a commander scan without leaving his seat, was licensed, copied, and built into Allied tanks across the war. In British service, it became the Vickers Mk.IV. In the United States, it became the M6. The Soviets adopted it as the Mk4. By 1944, that same idea helped commanders in Cromwell's and Sherman's and T-34s keep their turrets alive in the press of battle. Engineering born in Warsaw's workshops, first fitted to the 7 TP in the mid-1930s, helped the Allies see their way forward. So when we say that, in those first days, German crews realized their guns were useless against the 7 TP, we are not just talking about a single lopsided duel. We are talking about a pivot in understanding, the moment when doctrine met reality. Germany learned fast and changed fast, adding bigger guns and new roles to its fleet. Poland, under air attack and squeezed from two sides, had no such time. And yet, in the footprint of a small, well-made tank, you can trace the outlines of a different future, a fighting vehicle that did exactly what it was built to do, in the little time it had, and a piece of Polish ingenuity that would go on fighting long after the last 7 TP was scuttled or captured. The 7 TP could not save Poland. Nothing that small could have. But it saved lives in the hours it bought, and in the knowledge it forced on an opponent who had to change to win. And if you are looking for the last word in a story like this, it isn't written in the wrecks along a country road. It is written in a round glass window, set in a steel hatch, in a tank thousands of miles away and years later, where a commander turns his head, sees the danger, and lives because of it. In that circle of glass, the eye that began in a little Polish turret, you can watch the war turn, and you can feel the quiet, stubborn truth of the 7 TP. For a moment when it mattered, it made the enemy's guns feel useless, and even in defeat, it helped the future see.